Creating a new topic in a community forum can be intimidating, especially when you're new. First, don't forget to read all the guidelines in their entirety before you post anything. The next thing you'll be asked to do is to provide a post title. Coming up with a title is hard, let alone a good title in a community where you're not very familiar with the conventions and the culture. Do I add a prefix tag? I saw someone else do it. Should every word be capitalized? Is this too long? Is this too short? Is this too clickbaity? To make matters worse, in some communities you'll be quickly corrected or even scolded by moderators that are, to be fair, quite tired of having to fix everyone's titles. It's not very welcoming, especially because it's unreasonable to expect a new user to be able to perfectly follow all the unwritten and often inconsistent expectations for titles. I've looked at a lot of title patterns in different forums, and even the most diligent communities still have plenty of outliers and oddities. Okay, so we've chosen a title. Now to choose a category. This should be the easy part, right? You know what? Never mind. Categorizing your own posts in a new forum is like going to a random person's house and trying to put away all their things in the right places. There are often multiple valid ways to organize things, and without seeing enough prior examples, it's hard to figure out what the best solution is. In theory, the available categories should be chosen to have minimal overlap so there's no confusion about which category to choose. But in practice, this is virtually never the case. It's not unusual to have to decide between several possible categories that something could go into. This is a larger problem with complex, sprawling, hierarchical organization systems, but that's a topic for another video. So how do we improve the posting experience? Let's start by establishing one thing. Titles and categories are metadata about a post. In an abstract sense, you have the post content itself, and then the title and category exist as information about the post. If you've ever heard the old wisdom that says to write the body of an email before you write the subject, this is the reason. The title is derived from the content and not the other way around. This is especially true in the context of a forum, where clear communication and organization are more important than expressiveness and creativity, at least when it comes to titles. When titles are only derived from the content, you ensure that titles are actually a good reflection of the post content. It's not uncommon to see titles that are not quite relevant because, by the time the user finished and edited their longer posts, the underlying message had changed quite a bit. And of course, you always see some particularly vague titles like "Please help" or "Quick question" that barely represent the content at all. Good titles should be chosen to optimize some set of goals or principles for a given community's organization needs, whether it's clarity, conciseness, click-worthiness, or anything else. Like with categories, it's not practical to expect everyone in the community to be on the exact same page about this. Also, if these goals change over time, in theory the titles should be able to be changed too to better fit those needs, since again, they're just derived from the post content. One problem that arises is that people put important information in the title that isn't found in the actual message. For example, people sometimes put an error message in their title and then don't mention it in the message since, in their mind, they've already included it. It's actually very common to see posts that assume you've already read the title, and in extreme cases, the actual message is just something like, "Read the title." This completely breaks the idea that title is just metadata about the content, because if you change the title, you lose important information. Categories are even more clearly metadata. They literally exist to organize topics based on their content. My fellow boomers will remember that in the earlier days of YouTube, categories and tags were a user responsibility. Every time you uploaded a video, you had to pick from the list of available categories and add some number of arbitrary tags that you had to make up. It definitely wasn't always obvious which category to choose and how many tags to add and which special tag words would get the most views on your video. If you didn't add the right tags, people might never see your video, and frankly, it was in your best interest to stretch the truth a bit anyway. Sometimes people even added a heap of additional keywords in the description in the hopes of tricking the algorithm. Of course, now none of this is necessary because YouTube can automatically figure out how to classify and organize videos based on many abstract features, not just a simple list of broad categories. Organizing discussions in a relatively small community is just a bit different than organizing all of the YouTube videos in the world, but the analogy still holds. With today's technology, people shouldn't need to provide metadata about their content to place it within a sea of other posts that they likely haven't seen just to begin to participate in a community. So on our discussion platform, we trained some language models to do it for you. For titles, we started with a dataset of hundreds of thousands of forum posts, and then algorithmically chose a subset of the best titles, then fine-tuned a large language model on the task of generating user titles for each post. Then, to further improve the model, we had it generate a bunch of titles, we manually scored them, and then fed them back in as training data to provide additional reinforcement for what we consider to be good titles. The result is pretty good. On our site, it already performs better than the average new user. And typically, it even does a better job than human moderators, at least in terms of consistency. It's not perfect though. There's still some areas that could use improvement. Posts that are particularly short or vague tend to result in weaker titles, so to be fair, it's usually not easy for a human to title these posts either, and often these tend to just be low quality posts. If there's only an image and little to no text, then the model will also have very little information to go on, leading to strange results. This is where it might be useful to have a multimodal model that can describe the contents of images to help better understand what the post is about. It's also just generally a good idea for accessibility. In our community, creating a new discussion with an image and no text is not super common or encouraged, so it doesn't come up that often. Another area where the model sometimes gets confused is in very specific topical content that the model isn't trained on and doesn't understand. For example, in our community, people typically use the acronym CM3 to refer to Clipmaker 3, along with lots of other specific jargon that might be confusing if you're not familiar with them. One way to improve this is to fine-tune further on community-specific data and use reinforcement learning to cater the model to our specific needs. Human moderators can always step in and improve titles when the model slips up, but so far, it hasn't been needed a whole lot. It's less work for the mods and a better experience for users, especially new users. The category model was trained in a similar way. We fed in a bunch of community posts and trained the model to predict what category they should have. Despite the relatively small dataset, the model performs this task fairly easily. Part of the reason for this is that we only have a small handful of categories right now, and they're pretty straightforward. However, categorization for the most part seems to be an overall easier task than generating titles. For those rare edge cases where the model does get it wrong, it's pretty easy for a mod to correct it. The nice thing is, in the future, if we decide to change up the category scheme, we can train a model like this on a small set of examples and then use it to retroactively recategorize every post in the forum with fairly good accuracy. If you want to try it out for yourself, come join our community at panzoid.com/community. This is just one of the AI-driven components of our discussion platform, and there's a lot more that I'd love to share with you in future videos. If you did enjoy this one, let us know, and we'll see you in the next one.